Hello, my amazing children. This is Grandma Carla, and I am back with the Swiss Family Robinson by Johann Weiss. We are on Chapter 5. We revisit the wreck. Soundly and peacefully we slept until the cock crowed next morning, when my wife and I awoke and began to discuss the business of the day. It seems absolutely necessary, my dear wife, I began, to return at once to the wreck while it is yet calm, that we may save the poor animals left there, and bring on shore many articles of infinite value to us, which, if we do not now recover, we may finally lose entirely. On the other hand, I feel that there is an immense deal to be done on shore, and that I ought not to leave you in such an insecure shelter as this tent. Return to the wreck by all means, replied my wife cheerfully. Come, let us wake the children and set to work without delay. They were soon roused, and Fritz, overcoming his drowsiness before the others, ran out for his jackal. It was cold and stiff from the night air, and he placed it on its legs before the tent in a most lifelike attitude, and stood by to watch the effect upon the family. The dogs were first to perceive their enemy, and growling seemed inclined to dispose of the animal as they had disposed of its brethren in the night. But Fritz called them off. The noise the dogs made, however, had the effect of bringing out the younger children, and many were the exclamations they made at the sight of the strange animal. "A yellow dog!" cried France. "A wolf!" exclaimed Jack. "It is a striped fox," said Ernest. "Hullo," said Fritz, "the greatest men may make mistakes. Our professor does not know a jackal when he sees one." "But really," continued Ernest, examining the animal, "I think it's a fox." Very well, retorted Fritz. "No doubt you know better than your father. He thinks it's a jackal." "Come, boys," said I, "no more of this quarreling. You are none of you very far wrong, for the jackal partakes of the nature of all three, dog, wolf, and fox." The monkey had come out on Jack's shoulder, but no sooner did it catch sight of the jackal than it fled precipitously back into the tent and hid itself in a heap of moss until nothing was visible but the tip of its little nose. Jack soothed and comforted the frightened little animal, and I then summoned them all to prayers, soon after which we began our breakfast. So severely had we dealt with our supper the previous night that we had little to eat but the biscuits, which were so dry and hard that, hungry as we were, we could not swallow much. Let us fix... Whoops, I skipped a page here. Fritz and I took some cheese to help them down, while my wife and younger sons soaked theirs in water. Ernest roamed down to the shore and looked about for shellfish. Presently he returned with a few whelks. "Ah," said he, "if we but had some butter." "My boy," I replied, "your perpetual if, quite annoys me. Why do you not sit down and eat cheese like the rest of us?" "Not while I can get butter," he said. "See here, father," and he pointed to a large cask. "That barrel contains butter of some sort or another, for it is oozing out at the end." "Really, Ernest," I said, "we are indebted to you. I will open the cask." So saying, I took a knife and carefully cut a small hole so that I could exact the butter without exposing the mass of it to the effects of the air and the heat. Filling a coconut shell, we once more sat down and toasted our biscuits before the fire, spread them with a good Dutch butter. We found this vastly better than the dry biscuits, and while we were thus employed, I noticed that the two dogs were lying unusually quiet by my side. I at first attributed their drowsiness to this large meal during the night, but I soon discovered that it arose from a different cause. The faithful animals had not escaped unhurt from their late combat, but had received several deep and painful wounds, especially about the neck. The dogs began to lick each other on the places which they could not reach with their own tongues, and my wife carefully dressed the wounds with butter, from which she extracted the salt by washing. A sudden thought now struck Ernest, and he wisely remarked that if we were to make spiked collars for the dogs, they would in future escape such dangerous wounds. "Oh, yes," exclaimed Jack, "and I will make them. May I not, father?" "Try, by all means, Jack," said I, "and persuade your mother to assist you. And now, Fritz," I continued, "we must be starting, for you and I are to make a trip to the wreck." I begged the party who were to remain on shore to keep together as much as possible, and having arranged a set of signals with my wife that we might exchange communications, asked a blessing on our enterprise. I erected a signal post, and while Fritz was making preparations for our departure, hoisted a strip of sailcloth as a flag. This flag was to remain hoisted so long as all was well on shore. But should our return be desired, 3 shots were to be fired and the flag lowered. All was now ready, and warning my wife that we might find it necessary to remain all night on the vessel, we tenderly bade adieu and embarked. Except our guns and ammunition, we were taking nothing, that we might leave as much space as possible for the stowage of a large cargo. Fritz, however, had resolved to bring his little monkey, that he might obtain milk for it as soon as possible. We had not got far from the shore when I perceived that a current from the river set in directly for the vessel, and though my nautical knowledge was not great, I succeeded in steering the boat into the favorable stream, which carried us nearly 3/4 of our passage with little or no trouble to ourselves. Then, by dint of hard pulling, we accomplished the whole distance, and entering through the breach, gladly made fast our boat and stepped on board. Our first care was to see the animals, who greeted us with joy, lowing, bellowing, and bleating as we approached. Not that the poor beasts were hungry, for they were all still well supplied with food, but they were apparently pleased by the mere sight of human beings. Fritz then placed his monkey by one of the goats, and the little animal immediately suckled the milk with evident relish, chattering and grinning all the while. The monkey provided for, we refreshed ourselves with some wine and biscuits. "Now," said I, "we have plenty to do. Where shall we begin?" "Let us fix a mast and sail to our boat," answered Fritz, "for the current which brought us out will not take us back, whereas the fresh breeze we met would help us immensely had we but a sail." "Capital thought," I replied. "Let us set to work at once." I chose a stout spar to serve as a mast, and having made a hole in a plank nailed across one of the tubs, we, with the help of a rope and a couple of blocks, stepped it and secured it with stays. We then discovered a lug sail, which had belonged to one of the ship's boats. This we hoisted, and our craft was ready to sail. Fritz begged me to decorate the masthead with a red streamer to give our vessel a more finished appearance. Smiling at this childish but natural vanity, I complied with his request. I then contrived a rudder that I might be able to steer the boat, for though I knew that an oar would serve the purpose, it was cumbrous and inconvenient. Thus, while I was employed, Fritz examined the shore with his glass, and soon announced that the flag was flying and all was well. So much time had now slipped away that we found we could not return that night, as I had wished. We signaled our intention of remaining on board, and then spent the rest of our time in taking out the stones we had placed on the boat for ballast, and stowed in their place heavy articles of value to us. The ship had sailed for the purpose of supplying a young colony. She had therefore on board every conceivable article we could desire in our present situation. Our only difficulty, indeed, was to make a wise selection. A large quantity of powder and shot we first secured, and as Fritz considered that we could not have too many weapons, we added 3 excellent guns and a whole armful of swords, daggers, and knives. Remembering that knives and forks were necessary, we laid in a large stock of them and kitchen utensils of all sorts. Exploring the captain's cabin, we discovered a service of silver plate and a cellaret of good old wine. We then went over the stores and supplied ourselves with potted meats, portable soups, Westphalian hams, sausages, a bag of maize and wheat, and a quantity of other seeds and vegetables. I then added a barrel of sulfur for matches and as much cordage as I could find. All this, with nails, tools, and agricultural implements, complemented our cargo and sank our boat so low that I should have been obliged to lighten her had not the sea been calm. Night drew on, and a large fire, lighted by those on shore, showed us that all was well. We replied by hoisting 4 ship's lanterns, and 2 shots announced to us that our signal was perceived. Then, with a heartfelt prayer for the safety of our dear ones on shore, we retired to our boat, and Fritz, at all events, was soon sound asleep. For a while I could not sleep, and thought of my wife and children, alone and unprotected, saved by the great dogs, disturbed my rest. The night at length passed away. At daybreak, Fritz and I arose and went on deck. I brought the telescope to bear upon the shore, and with pleasure saw the flag still waving in the morning breeze. While I kept the glass directly to the land, I saw the door of the tent open and my wife appear and look steadfastly toward us. I at once hoisted a white flag, and in reply the flag on shore was thrice dipped. Oh, what a weight seemed lifted from my heart as I saw the signal. Fritz, I said, I am not now in such haste to get back, and begin to feel compassion for all those poor beasts. I wish we could devise some means of getting them on shore. We might make a raft, suggested Fritz, and take off 1 or 2 at a time. True, I replied. It is easy enough to make a raft, but to do it is quite another thing. Well, said Fritz, I can think of nothing else, unless, indeed, we make them such swimming belts as you made for the children. Really, my boy, that idea is worth having. I am not joking, indeed, I continued, and I saw him smile. We may get every one of the animals ashore in that way. So saying, I caught a fine sheep and proceeded to put our plan into execution. I first fastened a broad piece of linen around its belly, and to this attached some corks and empty tins. Then, with Fritz's help, I flung the animal into the sea. It sank, but a moment afterward rose and floated famously. Hurrah! Exclaimed Fritz. We will treat them all like that. We then rapidly caught the other animals and provided them, one after another, with a similar contrivance. The cow and the donkey gave us more trouble than did the others. As for them, we required something more buoyant than a mere cork. We at last found some empty casks and fastened 2 to each animal by thongs passed under its belly. This done, the whole herd were ready to start, and we brought the donkey to one of the ports to be the first to be launched. After some maneuvering, we got him in a convenient position, and then a sudden heave sent him plunging into the sea. He sank, and then, buoyed up by the cask, emerged head and back from the water. The cow, sheep, and goats followed him one after the other, and then the sow alone remained. She seemed, however, determined not to leave the ship. She kicked and struggled, squealed so violently that I really thought we should be obliged to abandon her. At length, after much trouble, we succeeded in sending her out of the port after the others, and when once in the water, such was the old lady's energy that she quickly distanced them and was the first to reach the shore. We had fastened to the horns or neck of each animal a cord with a float attached to the end, and now embarking, we gathered up these floats, set sail, and steered for shore, drawing our herd after us. Delighted with the successful accomplishment of our task, we got some biscuits and enjoyed a midday meal. Then, while Fritz amused himself with his monkey, I took up my glass and tried to make out how our dear ones on shore were employing themselves as I was thus engaged, a sudden shout from Fritz surprised me. I glanced up. There stood Fritz with his gun to his shoulder, pointing it at a huge shark. The monster was making for one of the finest sheep, and he turned on his side to seize his prey. As the white of his belly appeared, Fritz fired. The shot took effect, and our enemy disappeared, leaving a trace of blood on the calm water. "Well done, Fritz," I cried. "You will become a crack shot one of these days, but I trust you will not often have such dangerous game to shoot." Fritz's eyes sparkled at his success and my praise, and was reloading his gun, carefully watching the water. But the shark did not again appear, and borne onward by the breeze, we quickly neared the shore, steering the boat to a convenient landing place. I cast off the ropes which secured the animals and let them get ashore as best they might. There was no sign of my wife or children when we stepped on land, but a few moments afterward they appeared, and with a shout of joy ran toward us. We were thankful to once more be united, and after asking and replying to a few preliminary questions, proceeded to release our herd from their swimming belts, which, though so useful in the water, were exceedingly inconvenient on the shore. My wife was astonished at the apparatus. "How clever you are," she said. "I am not the inventor," I replied. "The honor is due to Fritz. He not only thought of this plan of bringing off the animals, but saved one at least of them from a most fearful death." And I then told him how bravely he had encountered the shark. Fritz, Ernest, and I began the work of unloading our craft, while Jack, seeing that the poor donkey was still encumbered with his swimming belt, tried to free him from it. But the donkey would not stand quietly, and the child's fingers were not strong enough to loosen the cordage. Finally, therefore, he scrambled upon the animal's back, and urging him on with hand and foot, trotted towards us. "Come, my boy," I said, "no one must be idle here, even for a moment. You will have riding practice enough hereafter. Dismount and come and help us." Jack was soon on his feet. "But I have not been idle all day," he said. "Look here." He pointed to a belt around his waist. It was a broad belt of yellow hair, in which he had stuck a couple of pistols and a knife. "You see," he added, "what I have made for the dogs. Here, Juno, Turk." The dogs came bounding up at his call, and I saw that they were each supplied with a collar of the same skin, in which were fastened nails which bristled around their necks in a most formidable manner. "Capital, capital, young man," said I. "But where did you get your materials, and who helped you?" "Except in cutting the skin," said my wife, "he had no assistance. And as for the materials, Fritz's jackal supplied us with the hair, and the needles and the thread came out of my wonderful bag." Fritz evidently did not approve of the use to which his jackal's hide had been devoted, and holding his nose, begged his little brother to keep at a distance. "Really, Jack," he said, "you should have cured the hide before you used it. The smell is disgusting." "Don't come near me. It is not the hide that smells at all," retorted Jack. "It is your nasty jackal itself, which you left in the sun." "Now, boys," said I, "no quarreling here. Do you, Jack, help your brother to drag the carcass to the sea, and if your belt smells after that, you must take it off and dry it better." The jackal was dragged off, and we then finished our work of unloading our boat. When this was accomplished, we started for our tent, and finding no preparation for supper, I said, "Fritz, let us have Westphalian ham." "Ernest," said my wife, smiling, "let us see if you cannot conjure up some eggs." Fritz got out a splendid ham and carried it to his mother triumphantly, while Ernest set before me a dozen white balls with parchment-like coverings. "Turtle eggs," said I. "Well done, Ernest. Where did you get them?" "That," replied my wife, "shall be told in due course when we relate our adventures. Now we will see what they will do toward making a supper for you. With these and your ham, I do not think we shall starve." Leaving my wife to prepare the supper, we returned to the shore and brought up what of the cargo we had left there. Then, having collected our herd of animals, we returned to the tent. The meal which awaited us was unlike the first supper we had there enjoyed as possible. My wife had improvised a table of a board laid on 2 casks. On this was spread a white damask tablecloth, on which were placed knives, forks, spoons, and plates for each person. A tureen of good soup first appeared, followed by a capital omelet, then slices of the ham, and finally some Dutch cheese, butter, and biscuits, with a bottle of the captain's Canary wine completed the repast. While we thus regaled ourselves, I related to my wife our adventures, and then begged she would remember her promise and tell me all that had happened in my absence. So that was their trip to the wreck. Let me show you the pictures. Okay, so here they are trying to get out to the wreck so that they could collect the animals and other useful items there. I think that might be the only picture, but let me look real quickly. Oops, no, we have here, they're bringing the animals onto the shore with their little belts that are keeping them afloat. And that is the end of chapter 5. Next time we'll read chapter 6, Mother Makes a Suggestion. And this is Grandma Carla, and I love you.